I have to open. Well, I'll do that when I go share. Okay. I've told everybody. Good to have you. Just as an FYI, for some inexplicable reason, I woke up middle of the night and never fell back asleep. So I'm running on fumes tonight. So hopefully I won't be making stuff up that never happened. It was in the 13th century when Ben Franklin was president of Georgia, all that kind of nice stuff. Anyways, what we're going to do tonight is talk about two or three different people, things. One is we're going to pick it up with Rabbi Chaim Vital. I mentioned last week he was the protege of the Arizal. Even though we didn't really finish 100% with the Arizal, when I talk about Rabbi Chaim Vital, I'll fill in the blanks. After talk about Rabbi Chaim Vital, and some of his works and some of the effects it has on certain tefillah till today, and some other issues about Kabbalah that work their way into daily life. We're going to segue into a topic that's running almost concurrently to this in Israel, which we'll get to hopefully still a little while. So Rabbi Chaim Vital was probably, after the Arizal, one of the most significant figures when it comes to Jewish mysticism. I mentioned last time that the Arizal, while he was very prolific in not his writing, but in his speech and his thoughts and promulgating this concept of what we call Lurianic Kabbalah, he really didn't write a lot. And it was left to his student, Rabbi Chaim Vital, to do the writing. So because of him, a lot of these things of the Arizal become very well known. He preserves them. He puts them into a systematic format for people to read, and becomes pretty much this approach to Kabbalah. What's known as Lurianic Kabbalah, named after the Arizal, whose last name was Luria. The dominant tradition of Kabbalah within Yahadut, Judaism. It influenced many generations, and very significant. You got to remember this now. Keep this in the back of your head for a class that's going to come up probably within the next, I'm going to guess, 6 weeks. Bezrat Hashem. Chassidut, the early days of Chassidut. Now, when we started Tanya, for those of you who learned Tanya with me, I gave an introduction about 2 classes on Chassidut back then. And I said, but one day we do a Jewish history class, we'll get more into it. That's what we're going to do. And the reason I'm mentioning it now is because there's a direct line that can be drawn from the early stages of the Arizal, Reb Chaim Vital, and their teachings through Chassidut, which is only about 100 years later, a little bit more than that, 150 years later. So, but between then and now, there's a lot of other fascinating things, such as pretend Mashiachs and all kinds of interesting things, and some bad things like massacres. And Jewish history is fun. What can I say? Not the massacres, God forbid. In any case, so let's talk a little bit about Chaim Vital. He's born in 1543 in Tzfat. He's not himself one who lived elsewhere and then came to Israel. He was born in Tzfat, but then he moved to Damascus in Syria for various reasons. And while he was there, and upon his return to Israel, his growth in mysticism was stellar. He was born into a very learned family. Now, it's interesting. We've had that phrase, those words applied to so many people we've talked about, whether it was Ibn Ezra or the Ramban or Rambam. The reason it's important to know that is that it teaches us something very interesting in the trajectory of Jewish history that we can learn from in our own lives. That a person who's born into a family where Torah means something and already has a meaning, it gives this child a leg up. If a person comes to Torah later in life or to Judaism later in life, it will have a different result. But that doesn't mean anything necessarily in the long term, but just it shows that there was a leg up, so to speak, for some of these people that we've been able to learn about. And because they also came from a fairly well-to-do family, in many of these cases, they were also able to afford private education as opposed to anything that was maybe 25 kids in a cheder. His father, Rabbi Yosef Vital, was actually of Italian descent, and it was very important to him and to his wife, the Reb Chaim's mother, that Torah become very important in his life and have a rigorous Torah education. And one of the things that he exhibited early on, not just he had a brilliant mind. This is we see as a common thread for so many people we've learned about, but he also was extremely curious. I connect to him a little bit, not having to do with the mysticism or any of his knowledge. Just I personally, it's always been a character trait of mine. I'm a very curious person. I always want to know why, how come, wherefore art thou. Reb Chaim Vital originally studied under Rabbi Moshe, the Alshich. You may have heard of him as a commentary, the Alshich, who at that time was one of the greatest Torah scholars in Tzfat. And he got a good, strong background in halacha, Tanakh, and Talmud. Now, why is that important to know also? Okay. There have been many people over the years I've spoken with that have expressed their desire at various ages and stages of their life to learn Kabbalah. And there are certain rules that kind of go with that. We know that it says that you're not supposed to start before age of 40, whether that's still accurate today, because, what is this, I feel 40 years old. So in any case, there's certain rules that go with it. But many of the people who've asked me and discussed it with me over the years, I would say that majority of them, that their foundation is not very strong. Meaning, if you're to ask them, just name the 5 books of the Torah, or can you, give some idea of how much breadth of halacha you've learned, how much Gemara have you learned, how much Torah you know. You need the foundation before you start delving into Kabbalistic thought, because it is, as I mentioned last week, it's like telling a person, I want to learn whatever very high level mathematics, but I really don't know what 2 plus 2 is. But that's okay. I want to learn the high level mathematics, and you can't do that. So we see that the Chaim Vital was given a wonderful basis and foundation, halacha, Torah, Gemara, and that helped him a tremendous amount, because on top of that, he had a passion for learning mystical aspects of the Torah. And because of that, he became a disciple of Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. Remember the Ramak? The Ramak was the teacher who taught the Arizal, and he deeply influenced also Rabbi Chaim Vital. And whereas the Ramak had some level of influence on Rabbi Chaim Vital, the major influence came from the Arizal. Part of what I'm going to say tonight about the Ramak, it'll be a little repetitious from last time, because they go together. So I won't spend too much time on some of the aspects, because we already talked to some of that in depth, and others I'll go into more. The Arizal actually said that his main reason he came to Tzfat was to teach Rav Chaim Vital. Remember, they talked about this last week. He had this prophetic almost approach to life. He already knew when he came to Tzfat, he was going to have a student, Rav Chaim Vital, who was going to be his major student. It would then be the one that caused the transmission of L'Irata Kabbalah for future generations. He would record his teachers' teachings, his classes, so that this way, none of what the Arizal was teaching would be lost. Imagine sitting in a class. If you're good at math, I'm okay, but imagine you're good at math. You're really good at math, and then the person, the world expert in the highest level of math, he knows quantum physics. I don't know what all these terms mean, but quantum mechanics and all these other things. They could talk about quarks, and they could talk about these other things. And he's going to give you a lecture, but you can't have any paper. You can't have your computer. You can't have. Okay, so you may remember some of them, but when he starts going off and discussing some of these much greater, broader, higher topics, it'll be harder to necessarily remember everything. So here you're talking about Torah. Here you're talking about mystical things and Kabbalah. So he made it his life's mission to transmit the words of the Arizal, and therefore he was taking copious notes in all of his classes. Some of his major works, Chaim Vital's major works, were The one he's most known for is something called Eitz Chaim, or Tree of Life. That's pretty much considered the foundational ABCs of the Lurianic Kabbalah, where he presents his system of what Kabbalah looks like and what it entails, what it involves, and all the mystical aspects of it, and the interplay between different spiritual realms. I want to show you, get on the screen. No, first I have to open it on my own computer. Just a second before I do. Oops. I need to just give me 1 second to put 3 images on my screen here. Sounds like a name for a good book. There's this one. Keep that there. This one. Keep that there. Okay, that's good enough for now. Okay, I'm going to share this one with you. This picture should look somewhat familiar to all of you. That doesn't mean you know what it refers to, but it is something that should look somewhat familiar. And this is what I call the 10 Sfirot. Again, we talk about this in Tanya. You may have seen this in some books. I'm not going to get into this now, but this is the building block of Lurianic Kabbalah. These are all what are called the Sfirot, or the divine emanations of God. For the simplest way to understand this extremely complex idea is if you were to have a massive spotlight with 1,000,000 candle foot power, which is the power of 1,000,000 candles 1 foot away. So it's extremely bright. Obviously, you could not withstand that light. And you put screens in front to minimize that amount of the intensity of that light. So in a sense, these are different intensities of the emanations and the divine spirituality of Hashem, and that they represent, again, this is very, 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 I can't say very enough times in this case, minimalistic idea of what this is, because it's like saying that the universe is a lot of stuff. Because this is its own universe. So let me come back here. Come back here. Why can I not get to? There. Okay, let me stop share. So, so that is one of the things that we get from Chaim Vital, who got it from the Arizal. And this is idea of the interplay between different spiritual realms. One thing that's important to know, and I know this is a history class, but it's still, as long as I'm mentioning these things tonight and last week, it's important to understand that when we talk about these ideas of different levels of spirituality, different levels of, say, Gan Eden, all these other topics, we're not talking about physical places. We're not talking about physical experiences. I'm talking something spiritual. Among those other topics, we talked last week about Tzimtzum, about how Hashem, right now I'm kind of just, again, some of the works of Chaim Vital, quoting the Arizal, which, again, we talked a little bit about last week. Tzimtzum, a divine contraction in order to enable the world, or the universe, to be created in the void left by God, so to speak, contracting, whatever that means, to place himself in the universe, to place the universe in him. What are also known as the Sfirot, which I just showed you, the Partsufim, which literally means the faces. They somehow shape divine influence. Shvirat HaKelim we talked about last week, and Tikkun Olam we talked about, and Shar HaGilgulim, the concept of transmigration of the soul. The reason it's being repeated tonight is that even though it starts with the Arizal, it's only Chaim Vital we have to thank for really making sure that we have those things to this day. There is another one which I touched on very briefly, called the Shar HaKavanot, that he wrote, which again is based on the Arizal, which literally means the gate of intentions. And what exactly is that? When we daven, when we do a mitzvah, in theory, and I say in theory because it doesn't happen all the time. Let's say when a man puts on tefillin, the guy's supposed to have a certain idea in his mind. I'm doing it to be mekayim the mitzvah of tefillin. That's the goal. I want to do the mitzvah. That's the basic. At least have that in mind, because a person who doesn't even think that, think about what happened at the Super Bowl the other night, and while they're putting on the tefillin, not even so they kind of lost the boat on that one. But what is it? What is this idea of kavanot? So I'm gonna put on the screen one more image. Share. And I'm gonna explain to you what this is. Most of you, I would imagine, never seen something like this, but it's kind of amazing when you find out what it's all about. Okay, this happens to be just from the Haggadah, but he has this on all of Tefillah and many, many other areas about mitzvot. And the Arizal teaches that when a person does an action, when a person says Hashem's name, for example, in a bracha, and I don't think it shows it in this particular siddur I have right now. Okay, I'll try and show this up to the screen here. Let me see. This is one of my siddurim. You'll notice that Shem Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, has in it, mixed into it, the Yud, the Shem of Elohim also. It's all mixed in the Yud Kei Vav Kei and Hashem of Elohim. There's a mixture of Hashem's name. What the Arizal did was to say there's different spellings. When I say spellings, it's still Yud Kei Vav Kei, but the different nikudot, the dots, which attach to each letter of the Yud Kei Vav Kei, have a different meaning behind them, what you're supposed to think when you're actually doing the mitzvah. So, for example, over here, it talks about the afikoman. So it says, when you eat the afikoman, v'chavein, he should have in mind, the afikoman, the spelling of Hashem's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, with the two dots, the three dots, the one dot, which is the shva, the segol, and the chirik, afal b'she'ein bo bracha. So he tells us something that not only when we make a bracha are there different ideas or emanations of God that we're supposed to have in mind, but even when there's no bracha, certain times when we do a mitzvah, such as the afikoman, have to say there, that we have to have a certain idea in our mind of various emanations of Hashem. Well, as I've said to people who have tried to teach me these things, and books that I've tried to use also, to me, it always looked like the nuclear codes or nuclear plan for North Korea. That's what it tends to look like. But I do have a number of siddurim where I have all these kavanot in there, and the more kavanot in the siddur, the thicker it gets. There are some siddurim, and I didn't put it on, not putting it on the screen, where you have page after page after page of the Shem Hashem, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, in different permutations, different nikudot, different order. And when you say the bracha of, let's say in Shmoneh Magen Avraham, there's like 2 or 3 pages that you don't read them. You look at them, scan them, and have certain thoughts in your head. Now you say, well, wait a minute, that's going to take me 19 hours to say Shmoneh Esrei. You'd be right. So that's why most people on the average day do not do that. Even people who daven trying to have some kavanot, not kavanah. I'm not about just saying understanding what you're saying, but I'm saying just having the higher level mystical thoughts about what's supposed to be thought about during the God's name being recited. We'll do it on occasion. We'll not do it necessarily every day or all the time. So again, this isn't Tefillah class. Maybe I'll deal with that another time in Tefillah class. But just understand that this also comes from the Arizal. He also, Chaim Vital also wrote a number of other books I have written down here. The Shar HaPsukim, Shar HaMitzvot, which are Kabbalistic interpretations of psukim, Kabbalistic interpretations of commandments. So what I'm going to tell you is not necessarily from Lurianic Kabbalah, but I'll give you an example of what it could be. We know that there's a chok, there's a mitzvah that we have, we don't know necessarily understand why we have it, is the prohibition of eating meat and milk together. We can't cook it together. We can't eat it together. We can't have benefit from it, like selling it. And it's a chok. It's a mitzvah that we don't know why. In Kabbalistic thought, does this come directly from Arizal or not? I can't tell you. But in Kabbalistic thought, it tells us that there is a reason. And the basic it boils down to is that in order that milk is associated with life, like a nursing mother, a nursing animal that's giving milk to its calf or whatever it's going to give it to. So milk represents life. To get meat, you have to kill. So therefore, it's death. So Hashem didn't want us to have life and death together on the same plate. These kind of, which again, relative to a lot of the other things, very basic ideas, are what came out of these ideas from the Arizal and then by Chaim Vital. Interestingly enough, that Chaim Vital was influential both in the Ashkenazi and the Sephardi world. Most of the Kabbalistic background of people, or the scholars of Kabbalah, come from the Sephardi world, but it was also within the Ashkenazi world as well, because after he died in 1620, and just in parentheses, the mid to later 1600s become extremely tumultuous for the Jewish people yet again. That's where we're going to, Bezrat Hashem, hopefully in a week or two. His manuscripts were copied and disseminated. This is already at a point where there's printing presses, and that's also having a huge effect in the Jewish world of being able to disseminate books and svarim and manuscripts. So it's being disseminated throughout the Jewish world, and his books reach Yemen, they reach North Africa, and Eastern Europe. So if you're a little bit understanding of the geography, we're talking both the Sephardi world and the Ashkenazi world, and the Kabbalists in both places take this material and run with it. There's an interesting connection, and not one, many times you will find in halakha where that Kabbalah actually will influence a halakha. I'm going to give you one example, and this one is more minhag than halakha, but I want to put that on the screen also if I have it here. Just find it real fast. Hold on one second. Oh, yeah. Where did I put it? Come out, wherever you are. Okay, I'll just take it from my here, this image here. Okay, so let's go here, and I'll do a screen share. I'm just talking to myself here, just feel free to listen along. Sure. Okay. This is also something we talked about in the Tefillah class, but it bears repeating now. Go here. Yeah, let me make this small. Get me out of the way here. Okay, there we go. So in my Sidur and many Sidurim, especially in Adot Mizrach Sidurim, you're going to see this. I'll read it to you and explain. It says as follows. This is in davening in the morning, after brachot, before Psukei de Zimra. Al pi divrei Arizal, based on the words or the writings of Arizal, Tov lekabel alav, it's good to accept upon yourself, le'ehov kol adam Yisrael, to love every Jew in Israel, lifnei hatfilah, before you start davening. We'll see how Kabbalistically this fits in a minute. V'lachein, therefore, im yesh adam Yisrael b'tzara, if a person in Israel, Jew, who's in pain and suffering, yitpalel alav kol yom b'ferush, he should even specifically daven for him, ha'idezet tichalel tfilato b'tfilat kol Yisrael, etc., etc., etc. The main thing here is to daven, to love every Jew. And a person says, that's something I say every day, I accept upon myself the mitzvah of love your neighbor as yourself. And I love every Jew. It's hard to say that, especially nowadays. Even if you don't believe it, as they say in counseling, fake it till you make it. This is where the key is going to come in now. And now I prepare my mouth. I've come now to daven before God. What does that mean? I'm now ready to daven before I prepare my mouth to daven before God. What does that even mean? The Maharal, if I'm not mistaken, is Maharal, quotes the Arizal and says the following. When there is pirud, when there is division here in this world, our tefillot don't make it up to the Shamayim, because Hashem wants there to be achdut. Hashem wants there to be unity. Hashem wants there to be the Jews to be united. Doesn't mean they don't go there at all, but it means they have a hard time getting to Shemayim. Again, in the spiritual sense. When we say that I accept upon, when you say, I accept upon myself, I have then brought ahava, love, and I brought kirub levavot, hearts coming together, so that now that the tefillot go to Shemaim complete and they get to their destination. This is a concept in Kabbalah that is actually mentioned in the halacha about the idea of davening, of coming for Hashem in the morning, and what to do. Okay, I want to continue now. I'll move you back over here. I'm saying like you could see what I got on my screen here, but you can't. Okay. I'm going to switch gears a little bit now, and we're going to talk about Israel going into the mid 1500s. We're going to go back just a little bit in time again, because we've gotten into the late 1500s, go back a little into the mid 1500s, and talk about a project you may know about, but not know the name, and you may know the name of the person involved. It was called the Tveria Project, and what it basically was a plan for a Jewish homeland in the 16th century. Now, the idea of a Jewish homeland that we know today as Israel, and in its early stages in basically the 1800s, and we know that Herzl, who obviously we'll have to spend a lot of time on one day, was the founder of, this is called in general terms, modern Zionism in all its various forms. The yearning for a Jewish homeland, which meant not just that we lived there, but it was be ours. Already in the 16th century, there's a concept, which remember now, Israel at that time was under the Ottoman influence. They were ruled by Turkey, the gigantic swath of land. If you've seen the map a couple of times already. And there was an idea that we needed a place within Israel that Jews could call their, not necessarily the whole country, because they'll be biting off more than we could chew, and there was no chance that the Ottoman government, the Ottoman rulers would give us that. But there was a different idea. That was to be called the Tveria Project. Tveria is the Hebrew word for Tiberias. And it was a very ambitious initiative. It was led by an influential Portuguese Jewish financier and philanthropist known as Dona Grazia Mendes Nassi. And it was also along with her nephew, Joseph Nassi. And the goal was to establish in the area of the Galilee, the city of what is now known as Tveria, to be, or was even known then as Tveria, to be a Jewish settlement under self-governing rule. That would be basically a miniature, what we would call Israel today, a miniature Israel just in Tveria. It was probably one of the earliest modern attempts to create a Jewish homeland centuries before the Zionist movement. Remember, we're talking the 1500s. The real modern day Zionist movement doesn't begin until the mid 1800s. So you're talking 300 years prior to the idea of looking for a Jewish homeland that eventually becomes Israel. So let's talk a little bit about the background of this particular endeavor. Probably for at least the 7th or 8th time, I'm mentioning an event or person that has to trace itself back to the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492. In 1492, they were expelled from Spain, in 1497 from Portugal. And again, one of the things they said way back then when we learned about it, and ever since then, in almost every class since, there have been ramifications over the centuries, the Jews being thrown out. This is only, like 50 years later that the pain and suffering that Jews went through from that had tremendous amounts of positive ramifications. Again, all these different amazing people that came out of this place, out of the people themselves or the families thereof from them that were spread out. And one of those hashlachot, or whatever how you say it in English, was the fact that there was a group of people, as we know, who were forced to convert to Christianity. We talked about the conversos. It's no longer, we don't call them Moranos anymore, which means pigs. Talked about that before. We never call them pigs, that chas shalom, call them Moranos. And they were the people who were forced to convert to Christianity, but lived a secret life as Jews. And among those people who were the conversos in Spain before they got thrown out was the Mendes Nassi family, who at that time was one of the wealthiest families in Europe. Dona Grazie, or Grazia, was born in the early 16th century. Remarkable woman, wealthy family. Herself, she became very influential, and she maintained her Jewish identity. Again, even though they were living outwardly as Christians, she, along with many others, maintained their Jewish identity. When the conversos were being tortured, not the right word, persecuted in Portugal. By that point, this is already a couple years after the Jews are kicked out of Spain. She runs with her family to Antwerp, Belgium, then to Italy, and finally into the Ottoman Empire. Now, why the Ottoman Empire? Again, we've talked about this before. Again, this is one of those things you have to, as you learn history, you see how so many things connect and not just individual events. Again, because the Ottoman Empire was very welcoming in general terms to the Jews, as opposed to most other places in the world. And she's welcomed by a man named Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. He is most famous for building the wall that is currently around the old city. That wall does not go back to biblical times. That's only in the 1500s when that wall was built, and he was the builder of that wall. There have been many changes to the wall and additions, but basically he was the builder of the wall that goes around the old city. Her nephew, Dona Grazie's nephew, he was her adopted son, Yosef Nasi. He became a very influential diplomat in the Ottoman court. What's interesting, you find that so many of the Sfaradim end up being, who became influential, was the Rambam, the Ramban, the Ibn Ezra. They all were very, and Abarbanel. He was known, who was known as Don Yitzchak Abarbanel. Don was not Don, wasn't his, it was like you'd say in a Lahavdil, a mafia family. It was a title. So he was able to become himself, her nephew, adopted son, became someone who was very highly connected. We would say today he had a tremendous amount of protexia, and he wanted to help Sephardi Jews to resettle, or to refugees to settle in a place that was secure and autonomous somewhere in the Ottoman area that was ruled in the Ottoman Empire. And because the Ottoman Empire had been a very good refuge for Jews who fled Spain, Portugal, and Italy, the idea was born by Dona Grazie and her nephew, Yosef, with a proposal that they proposed to the Ottoman Empire leadership to establish a settlement in Tveria, in the Galil, with a strong historical religious significance for the Jews, because historically Tveria was known to have strong connection. Why not Tzfat? Why not Yerushalayim? Why not this or why not that? I can't tell you. I don't know. And maybe if I did more research one day, I'll be able to find out. I don't know the answer. But Tveria had been a very large center of Jewish life during the Roman time, during the Byzantine periods, which come before the Ottoman periods. And it was also the place in which the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, which we've talked about, was compiled in the 4th and 5th century. So it was historically, it had a Jewish, very strong Jewish background and connection, a Torah connection also. But by the 16th century, meaning this time now we're talking about, the city was pretty much in ruins and very sparsely populated. And the Ottoman Empire actually saw a somewhat of a value to allow Jews to repopulate the area. Not because they were just magnanimous, but because they understood that it would boost the local economy. How many times have we seen already where a government that has been nice or good to the Jews, one of the main reasons they did it was because they understood it was going to be good for the economy. And so too, the Ottoman Empire, even though it was a tiny, tiny sliver of the entire empire, they understood that it would be something good for the empire. In 1561, middle of the almost early part of the second half of the 16th century, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent grants Yosef Nasi governorship of Tveria. And it gives him permission to rebuild the city and turn it into a center of Jewish settlement. Now, before I go, I'm going to mention one more thing, and we're going to stop a few minutes early. There, historically, going back to Tanakh, we see what does that mean to be a governor or a pecha? Pei Chet Hey in Tanakh. What does that mean? So the last governor of Yerushalayim, we all know, without maybe you don't even realize it, was um, my mind just went blank. So Gedalia ben Achikam. Gedalia ben Achikam, who was the last governor of Yerushalayim. This is already after the Jews are kicked out of Israel. This is already after the beginning of the Galut. It was the last gasp of Drew. I'm giving it a note here. Oh, the roads for trading went through Tveria. Thank you very much. Very good. Thank you, Judy. That's very helpful because that would also explain why they felt it could become a good hub of economy. Thank you. So Gedaliah ben Achikam, at the very end of Sefer Melachim, is murdered, and that's the almost official end and beginning of the full galut. It really doesn't really come to conclusion until about 135, the Bar Kochba revolution, which we also have spoken about. So the concept of the governor wasn't just some political hack. It meant it was what we would consider if it were a country, he'd be the prime minister or the president. He was the top person. So the Ottomans installed Yosef Nasi to be, it's kind of ironic that his name is Nasi, which means prince, to the governorship over this area. Does it work? Does it not work? How long does it last? We'll continue Bezrat Hashem with next week, just as kind of previews. Next, we're going to finish up about the Tveria project and a lot more to say about it. We're going to talk also then about going into the early 17th century, having to do with the Khmelnytsky massacre. We're going to talk about the Shabtai Tzvi. We're going to talk about a man named Rabbi Yaakov Emden and a whole Rabbi Yonasan Eibschitz. A lot of interesting, fascinating stories that will take place over the next 100 years or so, and the absolute mahapecha, or mahapecha, like a revolution that eventually leads to the birth of Chassidut. We're going to have to see, and I'm going to try to connect all the dots until we get to Chassidut. But we have a long ways to go till we get to there. Bezrat Hashem. So that's it for tonight. Thank you for being here tonight, everybody. And I think it's going to be an interesting few days coming up. Always interesting here, but I think a little bit more so now with all the pronouncements of the government, and here the government of the United States, and all our wonderful friends in this neighborhood. I don't mean meet, spend, or vote. And we can only daven for only good things. Bezrat Hashem. Bezrat Hashem. Have a good night.